In Matthew chapter 6, verse 24 through 34, Jesus continues to speak about the kingdom of heaven, the kingdom of God, and this new way of life he's calling his followers into. He spends some time here in these verses talking about worry and anxiety and how that all fits in the way of Jesus. And I think there's a lot of valuable things we can draw from this teaching of Jesus in the 21st century West, which is racked by worry and anxiety about so many things. There's so much that we can pull here from this teaching of Jesus. And I think it's important to note, I don't think Jesus was specifically speaking to those who have clinical anxiety disorders or depression. For those in those cases, professional treatment, it can't be stated enough, professional treatment and therapy are incredibly valuable. But I don't think that Jesus is specifically speaking to those kind of issues. He's speaking, I think, primarily to the continual low-grade anxiety and worry on a mass societal scale, right? He's talking about the worry and anxiety that is ever present in our minds at all times. And this was true in his culture in the first century in Israel, just as it's true for us in the 21st century West. Cultures that are crippled by anxiety, where it seems like as individuals and communities, we cannot escape this perpetual state of worry and anxiety, as Jesus says, over many things. And I think it's important to note as well that, of course, while we're both crippled, our society and the society Jesus was speaking to are crippled by anxiety and worry. There are some differences in what we were worrying about, right? Because in Jesus' culture and his context, he was speaking to people who struggled for even just the basic needs of life. And he speaks about concern over what to eat or what to drink or what to wear, which are often a little bit different from the things that we worry most about, the things that give us the most anxiety. And we don't necessarily often have the deep concern over, will I have what I need to eat today? Will I have clothing tomorrow? These aren't often the primary concerns in our minds, whereas in Jesus' culture, most of the people in his audience lived in a state of poverty. Most of his audience was racked with worry about needs that are foundational for human survival. And Greg Boyle says it this way. He says it isn't simply that being poor means having less money than the privileged. It's that being poor means living in a continual state of acute crisis. This is what they have to lug around every day. There's no room to worry about hopes and dreams and self-actualization when life's basic necessities are consuming all of my attention. Most 21st century Americans don't struggle with these basic necessities the same way many first century Israelites do. We're not saying that there aren't people in our culture that don't wrestle with these difficult questions and concerns. There are people out there who are asking the question, how will this paycheck cover this month's bills? How am I going to make ends meet? There are parents out there just hoping that, hey, today's school lunch will keep my child fed for the next 24 hours. Surely there are people in need who are racked with anxiety about the basic necessities of life. But for most of us, we don't wrestle with these needs. And even for me, when I was living in a dingy apartment filled with holes in the floor and the water pipes were freezing all the time, and I was eating mayonnaise and tortillas for lunch. Maybe you've been there before. But at the same time, I still stood in front of a closet that was full of different outfits. And the only anxiety I really had was which shirt I'm going to wear with what pants today, right? And so for us, who most of us don't wrestle with the basic necessities of life, who have most of the basics covered, we should have the state of acute crisis on lock, right? Well, it turns out, not so much. It's interesting that while most of us don't have anxiety over the basic needs being covered, isn't it interesting that we often are worried about some of the same things but in different ways, right? And instead of saying, hey, I don't really have any food to eat, we're constantly worried about, oh, what's for lunch today? Oh, I forgot to bring something. Am I going to get 3 square meals a day? What am I going to do for a snack, right? Or maybe we're simply asking the question, what should I wear today? My anxiety is not based around, do I have clothes, but what clothes should I wear? It's interesting. Anxiety has actually been on a massive rise over the past 50 years, and especially in the past 10 years. Jean Twenge, a psychology professor at San Diego State, wrote an article on this rise and had this to say. She said, "It's not an exaggeration to describe today's young adult generation as being on the brink of the worst mental health crisis in decades." This meteoric rise in anxiety appears to be spreading like wildfire, even among people who have all their basic day-to-day necessities met. A.J. Cronin conducted a study asking the simple question, what do those who have their basics met worry about? And his research gave him lots of information, which he categorized. He used to categorize our different worries into a few different buckets. He found that real, legitimate concerns made up 8% of our worries. Health-related concerns made up 12%. Petty or miscellaneous worries made up 19% of our anxiety. Things that happened in the past that can't be changed made up 30% of our anxiety, and 40% of our anxiety were rooted in concerns about future things that never happened. That means that 70% of our modern worries are about things that we have no power to change at all. And in Matthew chapter 6, verse 27, Jesus calls his disciples to something, and he asks them a simple question. Can any of you, by worrying, add a single hour to your life? Jesus doesn't suggest, he commands that his followers combat worry. And he does this 3 separate times. He takes worry and anxiety deeply seriously. Jesus includes worry as a dangerous problem in the same teachings when he calls out anger and adultery and hypocrisy and violence and divorce and pride. He includes worry as a primary threat for his disciples to address. And this isn't just dangerous for our spiritual formation. Deeply is. It's not just important for our mental and spiritual health. There are implications here for fulfilling the mission as the church, right? The world needs the church to model a way of life, the way of the kingdom that is free of worry, that's rich with hope, a way of life where we step into the darkest of places but remain fully alive. It needs the church to give us a model of a new way, because our culture is a culture in which anxiety rules everything we do. How can the church, God's people, model a different way? In this culture of anxiety and the commands of Jesus to combat worry in our culture and to build a new culture that is free from anxiety, that continually notes the anxieties and the fears and the worries that enter our minds and put them to the side, what can we do actively as followers of Jesus to combat anxiety and worry? I got one simple thing. What a great list of primary points. Number one, and only number one, do something so simple. Decompartmentalize your belief. It's so easy to trust God with my life, but only in specific environments, right? It's easy to stand in a worship gathering and trust God with everything that I am. Lord, I give everything to you, and hear God speak to me. Oh, this is what you want from me. You're guiding every single step. And these are powerful moments that we experience in a worship gathering, or it's a prayer moment, or it's in a small group. And wow, these are the spiritual spaces where I release everything to God and he speaks to me. But it's so much harder on Monday afternoon when the stress is piling up to have deep faith in God, that he cares about me. And these are the environments, those Monday afternoons and those Wednesday evenings when I'm just kind of like done and I'm exhausted and I'm stressed out and I'm emotionally at the end of my rope. It's these environments that Jesus was speaking to when he said, hey, we got to clear worry out of our lives. You can't worry about the basic needs of life. You can't worry about the constant things that nag at your mind. One of the most dangerous mindsets that's so easy to form is that God cares deeply about the details of my life and the trajectory of my family and the intimate formation of my personhood, while and only while I'm standing at the altar in a service. But less so when I'm driving into work or I'm walking to class full of stress over the presentation that I have that day. It's so easy to compartmentalize our belief and say, God's got me in all those powerful moments at the altar or in a worship service, but not when I'm waking up late because I'm just so racked with anxiety over all the things that are piling up in my life. It's easy to fall into an idea that God is intimately involved in my life, but only in specific circumstances, and forget that God is deeply concerned with, as Psalm 103 puts it, our waking and with our sleeping and with our going out and with our coming in. God cares deeply for even the small, mundane moments of our lives, not just the emotion-fueled high points in a church service or some other spiritual place. Decompartmentalize your belief. Invite the Holy Spirit to walk with you throughout your day and release the ever-present anxiety from your mind. Turn your awareness toward Him in even the most mundane moments of your week. Release every part of your heart, soul, and mind to Him, not only in those spiritual moments, but in the mundane moments. And deeply trust your Father to care for your every need, even the ones you don't think He's really interested in. It can be easy to overlook how destructive worry can truly become if unchecked, or to simply accept unhealthy levels of anxiety as a normal way of life that we're all living in. But like everything in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus is calling us out. He's calling us out of a culture that is full of, yes, pride and adultery and vengeance, but also out of a culture that allows the constant worries of life to consume our hearts and our minds. He's calling us out of that way, and He's calling us into a way to live, as Matthew 11 puts it, freely and lightly in the way of the kingdom.